Tahbilk really got going as a vineyard from 1860, and of course we've got those 1860 planted Shiraz vines still, which is a great legacy, and then expanded quite dramatically through till the late 1880s. And the owner of the day, John Penny Bear, had a vision that he wanted Tahbilk to become the biggest winery in the colony. And he sort of nearly achieved that. By the late 1880s, Tahbilk had about 350 acres of vines planted, and it was the third or fourth largest in the colony. And the colony was pretty much in those days, Victoria was the viticultural state. South Australia and New South Wales really hadn't got started. Now when you think about it, 350 acres of vines, which all would have been staked vines, closely planted, but all dry land, so very low yielding, might have produced 20,000 cases equivalency. So if it was third or fourth biggest winery, it wasn't a very big industry back in those days. You know, it was a tiny little cottage industry, and it was selling mostly spirits with using the still or fortified wines. Table wines were a tiny component. I guess the important take home, which will be reinforced through the day and particularly by the wines, is what it is that Tahbilk does that is different to other Australian winemakers or other winemakers internationally, and it's those points of difference which are the really important things. Obviously Marsanne is a big point of difference for us. We pretty much own that variety in whatever market we're in. We've got the oldest vines in the world, which were planted in 1927, and we've got the largest single holding, just short of 100 acres of Marsanne. We'll be trying the wines obviously, and we're also now doing a single vineyard, 1927 vines Marsanne, which we had the first release of that with the 1998 vintage. We're only up to the 2001 vintage. White wines is about separating the juice from the skins as quickly as possible and giving the juice absolute protection, in other words excluding as much oxygen as we can and cooling it down to as close to zero as soon as we possibly can. And that all happens pretty much through the crushing process. So we've got the big cooler behind you, so we can must cool down towards zero and really protect, particularly varieties like Marsanne, which are very lightly fruited. You know, you don't have the intensity of flavour that say Sauvignon Blanc has. So you need to really make sure that you maintain all of the aromatics that you've got there as best you can right through the process, so that you end up then with you know, a wine that's at least got some intensity. And with Marsanne, what we're trying to do is make sure that we've got a really good solid acid backbone, so that not only it's enjoyed as a younger wine, but it's going to cellar and cellar well. From the sort of more modern stainless steel refrigeration, tank presses, vinomatics, everything that you're going to see in your travels around different wineries in Australia. That's pretty much the norm for the Australian wine industry. What we're doing here though is a bit out of the norm, and I think the best way to describe the way we do Tahbilk's reds is that it's this whole complex here is a working museum. So we're using most, if not all, of the original equipment which dates back to 1860. So the process for us is crushing over where we were on the other side, and the reds are crushed there. The stalks are separated from the juice and the skins, and then they're pumped into one of these open vats. Can be any one of these oak open vats which date back to 1860, 1861, or you can see some concrete open vats at the back. The must is cooled to around 10 or 11 degrees, and then we allow it to cold soak for 2 or 3 days. Then we add the cultured yeast and the fermentation process gets underway.
Sorry, Alistair, how do you cool it in the wood? Do you insert?
We cool it over through that must cooler that you saw, that big stainless steel cooler over there. Yeah. But we do have the facility to be able to cool here if the ferment starts to get too warm.
Okay, so it's introduced into here in a cool state.
Yeah. And we find that having that initial cold soak releases some different aromatics and flavours which we otherwise wouldn't get through the fermentation process. So that works well for us. All we're doing then, once we've added the cultured yeast and we have the fermentation underway, is that we're pumping the fermenting juice over onto the skins twice a day for 20 minutes, and that's it. So there's no header boards, there's no plunging of the cap. It's a really gentle process. And we find that by doing that, that extracts as much of the colour, the flavour and the tannins as we need to make the style of wine that we want to. We find that if we started to use, we've experimented over time with header boards, with plunge, but we extract too much tannin. And you know, it's for us, you know, wine, a red wine is about, you know, a fruit umbrella covering the tannins, and if there's a little bit of new oak in there, but covering all of that so that it's all about the fruit making the expression of the wine. And if you've got too much tannin or too much oak or too much of anything and it sticks out from underneath that umbrella, then it's not in balance as a young wine. You know, our view is it's not going to be in balance as an older wine either. So you've got to get it right from the very beginning. And we find that it's, with the fruit here, it's very easy to over-extract tannin, so we've got to be careful about that. And that's why we use a very gentle process.